Welcome back to Chess Tactic. Today, we've got another explosive matchup from the Speed Chess Championship 2025. Jose Martinez Alcantara takes on Magnus Carlsen, the reigning king of fast chess. The game kicks off with the French defense, but it quickly turns wild as both players hurl pawns and pieces into a full-on tactical storm. Carlsen looks for counterplay, while Martinez brings the fire with fearless attacks and razor-sharp precision. This is top-speed chess at its most intense. Every move counts and the clock is ticking. And Martinez kicks us off with pawn to f4, the classic king's pawn opening, immediately staking a claim in the center and opening lines for his queen and bishop. Magnus responds with pawn to e6, the French defense. He's telling us he wants a more strategic, closed battle. This is a solid, resilient setup that Magnus has mastered. White plays pawn to d4, creating the ideal big center with two pawns side by side. This is the most principled way to fight for an advantage against the French. And black immediately challenges that center with pawn to d5. This is the core tension of the French defense. Black lets white build a center, only to attack it right away. Martinez develops his knight to c3, defending the f4 pawn and preparing for a sharp fight. This is often the most ambitious choice against the French. And there it is, bishop to b4, the Winawer variation. Magnus pins the knight, creating immediate complications. This is one of the most aggressive and theoretically rich lines in all of chess. Magnus is ready for a brawl. White pushes the pawn to f5, locking the center. The plan now is to use that space advantage, while black will try to undermine white's pawn chain from the flank. An interesting move from Carlsen, queen to d7. It prepares to challenge white's control of the dark squares and keeps the queen flexible, a very subtle, high-level idea. Martinez plays pawn to a3, immediately questioning the bishop on b4. This forces black to make a decision, trade the bishop or retreat. And Magnus retreats the bishop all the way back to fate. Now, this might look strange to some, but it's a modern concept. He preserves his valuable bishop and plans to reroute it later, a very deep and patient approach. White develops the queen to g4, putting pressure on the king side and eyeing black's potential weaknesses. This is a very direct and aggressive move. In response, black plays pawn to b6, preparing to fianchetto the light-squared bishop to a6, where it will challenge white's control of the center. Martinez develops his bishop to b5, putting a pin on the c6 pawn and restricting black's development, a very annoying move for black to deal with. Carlsen responds with pawn to c6, breaking the pin and kicking the bishop away. Now the game enters a more strategic phase. The bishop retreats to d3, where it keeps an eye on the king side and supports the center. A solid, useful repositioning. And just as planned, bishop to a6. Magnus wants to trade off white's strong bishop on d3, which is often a key strategic goal for black in these structures. Martinez develops his knight to f3, controlling the center and preparing to castle. He's not in a rush to trade bishops just yet. Magnus insists on the trade. Bishop takes bishop on d3. This resolves some of the central tension, but it also gives white something in return. And white recaptures with the c-pawn. Now white has doubled pawns, which can be a weakness, but they also control key squares. The position remains very balanced. A provocative move from Magnus, pawn to h5, directly challenging the white queen. He's grabbing space on the king side and forcing Martinez to react. Very bold. The queen sidesteps to f4. From here, it keeps pressure on the position without being immediately harassed. A sensible retreat. Knight to s7. A standard developing move, preparing to bring the knight into the game, possibly to g6 to challenge the white queen. Martinez reroutes his own knight to e2. He's getting ready to fight for the center and perhaps challenge black's knight when it comes to g6. And there's the classic French counter-strike, pawn to c5, attacking the base of white's pawn chain on d4. The battle for the center is officially on. Martinez calmly castles kingside, getting his king to safety before the position fully explodes. A very wise decision. Magnus develops his knight to c6, adding another attacker to the d4 pawn. The pressure is building move by move. White pushes the pawn to h4, preventing black's knight from easily jumping to g5 and creating some breathing room for the king. And just as expected, knight to g6. The knight lands on a great square, attacking the white queen and controlling important territory. The queen retreats to g3. It's been a bit of a dance with this queen, but Martinez is keeping it active and ready for action. Carlsen captures on d4, opening up the c-file for his rooks. He's clarifying the central structure, hoping to create weaknesses in white's camp. Martinez develops his bishop to d2, preparing to recapture on d4 and connecting his rooks, a calm and solid move. Magnus develops his bishop to e7, finally completing his development. Both sides are now fully mobilized and the middle game fight is about to intensify. White strikes on the queen side with pawn to b4, a great move, aiming to create counterplay and disrupt black's pawn structure. Magnus brings his rook to the open c-file. This is a classic idea. Placing your rooks on open files is a fundamental you can use in your own games. Martinez pushes the pawn further to b5, attacking the knight on c6 and forcing black to respond. The queen side is becoming a real battleground. The knight jumps to a5. It's a bit on the edge of the board, but it keeps an eye on key squares and avoids being trapped. Bishop takes the knight on a5. Martinez decides to trade, simplifying the position slightly but also damaging black's pawn structure. Black recaptures with the b-pawn. Now Carlsen has doubled, isolated pawns on the file. They look weak, but they also control important squares. Knight recaptures on d4. Martinez now has a very strong knight in the center of the board. This piece will be a major headache for black. Magnus finally castles kingside, getting his king out of the center. It's late in the game to castle, but better late than never. White plays pawn to a4, fixing black's weak pawn on a5 and preparing to create more pressure on the queen side. Rook to c3, Magnus invades white's position, placing his rook on a very aggressive square. This is a sign that he's looking for active counterplay. Martinez brings his rook to dun, defending the d-pawn and preparing to challenge black's control of the d-file. And Magnus doubles his rooks on the c-file. This is a textbook power move, maximizing the pressure along the open file, a fantastic strategic concept. Martinez plants his knight on c6. What a move! This knight is an absolute monster, a true octopus paralyzing black's position. It restricts the rooks and creates immense threats. The tension is reaching its peak. Magnus challenges the knight with pawn to a6, trying to undermine its support. He has to do something about that piece. Knight to d4, Martinez simply repositions his other knight to an equally fantastic square, defending the outpost on c6. White's knights are dominating the board. And Magnus unleashes a thunderbolt. Bishop takes pawn on h4. This is an incredible sacrifice, giving up a piece to shatter white's kingside pawn cover and expose the king. Would you have found this move? The game has just exploded into chaos. The queen moves to f3, getting out of the line of fire and keeping an eye on the defense. Martinez has to be extremely careful now. Magnus captures on b5, continuing his plan to create counterplay on the queen side while his kingside attack brews. White recaptures, opening the file for his rook. The position is incredibly sharp, with threats for both sides all over the board. The bishop retreats to date. It's a slightly passive square, but Magnus is trying to regroup and coordinate his pieces for the final assault. Queen takes the pawn on h5. Martinez accepts the material, confident that he can defend against black's attack. A brave decision. Bishop to b6, putting pressure on the d4 knight and aiming at the weakened white kingside. Every move from Magnus now is a threat. White plays pawn to j3, creating an escape square for his king and shoring up the defense. A crucial prophylactic move. Queen to c7. The black queen swings into the action, connecting the rooks and preparing to invade. Martinez lifts his rook to a4. A fantastic multi-purpose move, preparing to swing over to the kingside for defense or attack. Bishop takes knight on d4. Magnus decides to eliminate one of white's powerful knights, but this also relieves some of the pressure on his own position. The rook recaptures on d4. Now white's rook is active in the center and the game is still on a knife's edge. Queen to b6, forking the rook on d4 and the pawn on b5. A tricky move from Carlsen, trying to win back some material. And here comes the real fireworks show. Martinez plays rook to h4. This looks like a simple defensive move, but it contains pure venom. He is setting a deep, brilliant trap. Watch closely, this move is about to decide the entire game. And Magnus takes the bait. Knight takes rook on h4. It seems like a free rook, a winning move that simplifies the position, but it's a tragic mistake. Martinez has seen one move deeper, and this is the moment the game completely turns. There it is, knight to e7 check. This is the devastating point of white's combination. This knight fork attacks the king on fate and the rook on sate simultaneously. Black's position collapses in an instant. A tactical masterpiece from Martinez. Knight takes the rook on sate. White is now winning a decisive amount of material, and the rest is a matter of technique. Black recaptures with the rook, but the damage is done. White has a queen for a rook and knight, a completely winning advantage. And the cleanup begins. Queen to height check. Martinez is not giving Magnus any breathing room, forcing the king out into the open. The king is forced to step forward to S7. It's a lonely walk for the black king. Queen takes the rook on sate. White cashes in, grabbing the final major piece and leaving black's army in shambles. A final desperate check from Magnus with knight to F3. He's trying to create some chaos, but it's too little, too late. The king calmly steps to G2, easily sidestepping the threat. White's position is completely secure. The knight captures the pawn on F5, but this is a hollow victory. White's threats are far more severe. Queen to A6, a brilliant simplifying move offering a queen trade. If black trades queens, White's passed b-pawn will win the game easily. Magnus is forced to play knight to D7 to block the pawn, but now his pieces are tied down. Rook to Cone, Martinez activates his final piece and the pressure becomes unbearable. The passed pawn is the star of the show now. The queen shifts to D4, desperately trying to create some counter-threats against the white king. Queen takes the pawn on A5. Martinez eliminates one of black's pawns and brings his queen closer to the action. Queen takes the pawn on D3, but white is ready for this. The passed b-pawn is the only thing that matters. Queen to B4 check, forcing the black king to move and setting up the final push. The king moves to F6, but there is no safe square on the board. And here it comes, pawn to B6. The pawn is now just 2 squares away from becoming a new queen. Black is completely lost. Knight to F5, a last-ditch attempt to create an attack, but white has everything under control. And with queen to F4 check, it's all over. After the king moves, the b-pawn will promote and there is nothing left to do. Magnus Carlsen resigns the game. What an absolutely stunning performance from José Martinez Alcantara. He weathered a ferocious sacrificial attack from Magnus Carlsen and uncorked a brilliant tactical combination to seal the victory. A truly unforgettable game and a massive win against the best in the world. Thanks for joining us on Chess Tactic today.